Gallery owner told black artist, "This isn't fine art." Her piece sold for $800K at Sothebys that evening. "This isn't fine art," the woman said. She did not lower her voice. She did not look to see who was standing nearby. She stood in the center of the Hargrove Gallery on West 57th Street in her ivory Chanel blazer, and she said it again, slower this time, each word deliberate and measured, as if the woman in front of her had somehow failed to comprehend the first delivery. "This is not fine art. This is craft work, community center craft work at best." The gallery was full. It was the night of the Hargrove Autumn Preview, the most attended private viewing on the Manhattan Gallery circuit, and there were perhaps 80 people standing with glasses of sparkling wine on a floor so polished you could see the chandelier reflected in it like a chandelier suspended in still water. The woman who had just spoken was Claudia Hargrove. She was 61 years old, silver-haired, with a bone structure that suggested an entire upbringing built on the settled understanding that rooms belonged to her when she entered them. She had curated the Hargrove Gallery for 32 years, and in that time had made and unmade careers, had decided whose work deserved the walls of what institution, had spoken at Venice and Basel and the Whitney, and had never once, in 3 decades, had occasion to wonder whether her opinion on a piece of art would be received as anything other than the final word. She stood with her arms folded and one heel angled back on the polished floor, the posture of a woman who has never felt uncertain about anything she has just said. The woman she was speaking to did not move. She held a portfolio case in both hands, a scuffed black zippered case with a broken wheel on the bottom that had been dragging slightly since she came in from the street. She was 34 years old. Her name was Simone Sotheby, and what Claudia Hargrove could not have known, standing in her own gallery with her arms folded and her room full of collectors and champagne, was that in exactly 4 hours and 12 minutes, one of Simone's paintings would sell at Sotheby's main auction house, 14 blocks uptown, for $800,000. But Claudia Hargrove had just made the last mistake of her professional life. Yo, hold on. They are standing in the middle of a packed gallery, in front of 80 people with champagne glasses. And she just said that out loud? With her whole chest? She looked at this woman's portfolio case, and her mind was already made up before she saw a single brushstroke. Let me tell you right now, she had absolutely no idea what was about to come for her. Let's get all the way into this. Simone Sotheby grew up on the 4th floor of a walk-up building in the Mott Haven section of the South Bronx, in a 3-bedroom apartment shared by her mother, her grandmother, and 2 younger brothers. The elevator had stopped working in 1998 and had never been repaired, and the landlord's various assurances on this point had long since passed, through exasperation, into the particular kind of dark humor that is the last available response to a situation you have fully accepted you cannot change. The hallway outside their door smelled of boiled plantain and pine sol, and in the cold months, of the kerosene space heater that her grandmother dragged from room to room, because the building's radiator worked in the same aspirational manner as the elevator. There was a crack that ran from the kitchen window frame all the way to the ceiling light, a long diagonal split in the plaster that Simone had memorized before she could read. Every spring her mother packed it with joint compound and painted over it in the apartment's original off-white, and every winter when the building contracted, the crack opened again, and her mother would look at it and say nothing and add joint compound to the grocery list and keep moving. Her mother was Adieze Achebe. She worked 2 jobs. Monday through Friday, she cleaned offices in midtown commercial buildings for a property management company that dispatched its crew before sunrise and had them back on the street before the office workers arrived. On Saturdays and Sundays, she worked the steam tables at a catering hall in Hunts Point, serving food at events where nobody looked at the people behind the table. She wore her hair pressed flat under a hairnet 6 days a week, and on Sunday mornings she sat in the second pew of Greater Calvary Baptist Church, with her hair out and her chin lifted and her hands folded over her Bible, looking, Simone always thought, like someone who had decided as a matter of settled fact that the world did not have the authority to take her dignity away. It was Adieze who first put a brush in Simone's hand, not a real brush at first, a foam brush from the dollar store, and a set of 6 acrylic colors in a plastic tray that cost $2.89. Simone was 7. Her mother set the tray on the kitchen table on a Saturday afternoon, between the salt shaker and the stack of mail, and said only, "Show me what you see." That was the entire instruction. Simone picked up the brush and painted the crack in the wall. She painted it exactly as it was, with its diagonal angle and the shadows it threw, and the way the afternoon light came through the kitchen window, and fell across it in a way that made it look, at that particular hour, almost like it belonged there. Adese stood behind her and looked at the painting, and pressed both hands flat against her chest, and did not say anything. That was the first time. It would not be the last. By the time Simone was 12, she had filled 47 composition notebooks with drawings. She drew everything around her, with the same quality of attention she gave the crack. The man who sold incense and shea butter from a folding table on Willis Avenue, who moved his operation from corner to corner depending on the patrol schedule. The stray dog behind the Associated Supermarket on Cypress Avenue, three-legged, one amber eye, who had worked out a complex treaty with the stock boys involving bread rolls. The inside of the 6 train at rush hour, rendered from memory with an accuracy that her art teacher, Mr. Ferreira, had initially suspected was traced. She had not traced anything. She simply looked at things the way you look at something when you have already decided it is worth looking at before you understand why. Mr. Ferreira taught visual arts at the public school on Willis Avenue. He wore the same green cardigan every day and approached his subject with the conviction of a man who had decided what he was doing mattered regardless of the building's resources and regardless of whether the administration agreed. He recognized immediately what he was looking at when Simone handed him the 47th notebook. He sat at his desk with it for a full lunch period and called her back after the final bell and said, "You are going to need to be serious about this." She was 12. She said, "I know." By 15, she had won the Citywide Visual Arts Prize 3 consecutive years. The third time she accepted the award at a ceremony in Brooklyn, Adese sat in the audience in a borrowed dress and watched her daughter cross the stage with the particular expression of a woman watching a future arrive that she had always believed in but had not been certain she would live to see. What nobody at those ceremonies understood was the specific direction Simone's work was already beginning to move. She had discovered encaustic painting at 16 through a library book she had checked out so many times the librarian had finally suggested she keep it. Encaustic is a wax-based painting medium that has existed since ancient Egypt. You melt pigmented beeswax, apply it to a rigid panel, and fuse it with heat. Then you build layer on layer, each one fused and cooled before the next is added. The medium produces a surface of extraordinary optical depth, an image that appears suspended inside the panel rather than resting on its surface, as if you are looking through glass into something lit from within. It is among the most technically demanding of all painting practices, requiring precision and patience in a ratio that most working artists find prohibitive. Simone found it natural, the way certain people are immediately natural with a particular instrument. The medium had been waiting. She got a partial scholarship to Cooper Union School of Art when she was 18. She supplemented it with Pell Grants and a work-study job cleaning the printmaking studio 3 mornings a week, mopping the floors and draining the acid baths before the other students arrived. She graduated 4 years later with a thesis series of 6 encaustic panels that her faculty advisor, Professor Lenora Okafor, described in the catalog as a formal vocabulary that does not borrow from any existing movement but arrives fully formed, rooted in a specific geography, and translating that geography into something that exceeds it. The thesis show ran 9 days in the Foundation Building Gallery. 3 working curators attended. One left a business card taped to the wall next to Simone's artist statement. That curator was not Claudia Hargrove. The person who left the card was Priya Sethuraman from the studio program at the new museum. She visited Simone's studio 6 months later, a one-room space in Mott Haven, 4 blocks from the building where Simone grew up. Priya spent 2 hours moving through the paintings propped against every surface, faces turned out, and at the end of those 2 hours, she sat on an overturned milk crate and said quietly, "You need to be careful. Not everyone who offers you a door is opening it for you." Simone wrote that sentence in a composition notebook that evening and underlined it. She would not fully understand it for another 11 years. Over the decade that followed, Simone built a body of work of 43 finished panels. The imagery drew from the visual archive of Mott Haven, The patterns on the oilcloth tablecloths her grandmother laid on the kitchen table each morning. The light falling through fire escape grates onto concrete in precise configurations that changed with the season and the hour. The arrangement of lit windows in the housing projects at night, when each rectangle of light makes its own small world against the dark. Her process took months per piece. She built 30 layers of wax and pigment, fused each one, cooled it, then sanded back with 220 grit paper until the surface developed the quality she was after, which she described once in an interview as the feeling of something being simultaneously remembered and happening right now. Her studio stayed cold so the panels could cool between sessions, and she worked in a canvas jacket with the collar up and the radio on low and her grandmother's faded science fair ribbon from 1961 tacked to the wall above the work table. She sold through a cooperative gallery in Harlem run by and for black artists. Through the Studio Museum's annual benefit auction, where 2 of her pieces had gone to institutional collections. To private collectors who found her through word of mouth and made the trip to Mott Haven with tote bags and open eyes. One of them, retired federal judge named Constance Whitmore, had purchased 4 pieces over 5 years and hung them in her home office in Riverdale, and, when people asked, gave Simone's name clearly and in full. What Simone had also built over those years, though she did not think of it this way, was a record of every closed door the Manhattan gallery system had presented to her, and she had walked up to anyway. The first was 3 years out of Cooper Union, when she submitted a portfolio to a gallery on Chelsea's West 24th Street through their open call program. She received a form email 14 weeks later, 2 sentences. The second sentence said that the work did not align with the gallery's current program direction. She saved the email in a folder she titled Not Yet and went back to the studio. The second time was when she was 29. A collector who had purchased one of her encaustic studies told her he had mentioned her work to the director of a major gallery on the Upper East Side and that the director had expressed interest in meeting. Simone dressed carefully for that meeting, took the 4 train uptown, and arrived at the gallery at 2 in the afternoon. The receptionist at the front desk checked the appointment book twice and said there was nothing listed under her name. Simone gave the collector's name as her referral. The receptionist disappeared into a back office. She returned 2 minutes later and said the director was unexpectedly unavailable. She said it without quite looking at Simone. Simone said she understood and would reschedule, and the receptionist said she could leave a card. She left a card. The director never called. The collector, embarrassed on her behalf, told her later that the director had said the work was interesting but not quite commercial enough for the gallery's collector base. What he did not say, and what both Simone and the collector understood without it being said, was what the gallery's collector base actually meant in that context. The third time was 2 years before the night of the Hargrove preview. An independent curator, Simone, had met at an art fair, approached her about including one of her panels in a group show at a gallery in Tribeca. The show had a theme, and the piece Simone had in mind fit it precisely. She agreed, consigned the work, and attended the opening. She was the only black artist in the show. At the opening, a gallerist from an adjacent space came through, looked at the piece, asked the curator whose work it was, and when the curator said Simone's name and pointed her out across the room, the gallerist looked at Simone for a moment and then said something quiet to the curator and moved on. The piece received a mention in one review of the show. The reviewer called it decorative and technically proficient in the same sentence, the way you use 2 compliments to communicate a limitation. Simone read the review twice and then went back to the studio and started a new panel. None of these doors had broken her. Each one had added one more layer to what she was building, the same way she added layers to the panels, pressing each one in and fusing it, and sanding it back until it became part of something deeper than it had been on its own. The work was not waiting for anyone's permission. It never had been. But the doors had kept coming, and Simone had kept walking up to them, and she had not stopped. The scuffed portfolio case with the broken wheel was not a symbol of failure. It was a record of every room she had refused to stop entering. What Simone had not told anyone except her mother, her grandmother, and Judge Whitmore was what had happened 6 weeks before tonight. A specialist at Sothebys named Thomas Aiken had seen one of her pieces at a collector's home in Connecticut and had reached her through the Harlem Cooperative. He called on a Thursday afternoon with the measured calm of someone who has made 1,000 such calls. He asked whether she had any finished work to consign for the autumn evening sale. She asked him to repeat the name of the sale. He repeated it. She sat down. He said the piece he had seen, a 54 by 42-inch encaustic panel titled Mott Haven, 3 a.m. January, was likely, conservatively, to achieve between $400,000 and $600,000. She had called her mother before calling him back. Adeze had said, "You already know what you want to do. What are you calling me for?" Simone had laughed, which was the point. She called Aiken back and consigned it. She told no one else. She put on her best dress this evening and took the crosstown bus 14 blocks south with the portfolio case, because she had an appointment at the Hargrove Gallery. 3 weeks ago, she had submitted through the gallery's online portal. Marcus Webb, a gallery assistant, had called to schedule a review with Miss Hargrove, who was open to considering new artists for the spring program. Simone packed 3 large-format archival prints into the scuffed case and told herself on the bus that if it went nowhere, it was still practice. You stay ready. She arrived at 6:55 p.m. Nobody at the door knew her name. She stood in the foyer, and 2 separate guests asked if she worked there. One asked her to direct him to the bar. Another asked if she was with the catering company. She said she was not and smiled, and the man moved on without apologizing. When Claudia Hargrove finally crossed the room toward her, she did not extend her hand. She looked at the portfolio case, then at Simone's dress, then at the portfolio case again. She said, "You're the artist." She said it the way you say something you are not entirely pleased to confirm. Simone said, "I am. Thank you for your time. I have 3 studies from a new encaustic series." She began opening the case. Claudia said, "Where are you showing currently?" Simone named the cooperative in Harlem. She named the Studio Museum benefit auctions. She mentioned that one of her pieces had recently been acquired by a private collector for the autumn collection, and that she was looking forward to expanding her institutional presence. She did not name Sothebys. Claudia Hargrove's face made a very small adjustment at the mention of the Harlem Cooperative, the kind of micro-expression that communicates a decision made before a word was spoken. "The cooperative," Claudia said. She said it the way you say the name of a place you have no intention of visiting. "I see." She lifted the first print from the case by its corner. The way you might lift something from an inbox you already know you're returning. It was a large-format archival reproduction of a new encaustic panel, the wax depth visible even in print, the layering of translucent color creating that quality of suspension that was the signature of Simone's work. Claudia held it at arm's length. She tilted her head right. She looked at it for exactly 5 seconds. She set it down on the edge of a nearby console table without asking to see the second or the third. "Very graphic," she said. She allowed a pause. "The decorative quality is strong, very pattern-based." Another pause. "It reads more like illustration than painting to me." She turned fractionally toward the room, as if the conversation were already concluding, and then she said it. "This isn't fine art, this is craft work. Community center craft work at best." The man standing 3 feet to her left with a champagne flute had clearly heard it. He looked at the polished floor. The woman in the red dress, who had been approaching from across the room, changed her angle and found somewhere else to be. At the reception desk near the entry, Marcus Webb had gone completely still. Claudia Hargrove continued, "If you want to work seriously in this market, you have to understand what the market is asking for," she said. With the tone of someone sharing an inconvenient truth, they have been kind enough to carry on your behalf. There's a ceiling on work that reads as community or cultural. I say that to help you. Not every artist is positioned for this level. There's no shame in knowing your lane. She looked briefly over Simone's shoulder at something happening elsewhere in the gallery, as if the matter were already filed. She did not ask to see the other 2 prints. She did not ask Simone's full name again, though it had been provided when the appointment was made. She did not say goodbye. Simone Achebe stood with the case in both hands, and could feel the edges of the handle pressing into her fingers. Her left thumb had folded itself slowly into the center of her palm, and was pressing there, the nail leaving a half-moon mark in the skin, and her face showed none of this. She said, "Thank you for your time." She put the print back in the case. She zipped it closed. She turned and walked to the door. The broken wheel dragged across the polished floor on the way out and made a small scraping sound that nobody acknowledged, and the room went on being a room. Marcus Webb watched her leave. He stood at the reception desk, with his hand resting in the pocket of his blazer, where his phone was. He had been standing at exactly the right angle. The ambient light in the gallery was very good. He had not set out to film anything. He had simply been watching what was happening, and his hand had moved to his phone, the way your hand moves to the only available response when every other response has been removed. The phone was angled upward from his pocket at a precise angle, and the front-facing microphone was, as he would discover when he watched the footage on the Q train home, very clean. Claudia's voice was completely audible. The man with the champagne was visible in the right edge of the frame. So was the woman in the red dress changing direction. Marcus Webb watched the footage 3 times on the subway. Then he put his phone on his kitchen table and stared at the ceiling and went to sleep at 2 in the morning with the footage sitting in the phone. Simone, meanwhile, crossed the lobby of Sothebys on York Avenue at 7:54 p.m. and was escorted to the main sale room by Thomas Aiken, who handed her a paddle and said, "You won't need it, but it's tradition." She sat and put the case between her feet. The sale room held 400 seats and every seat was full. Phone specialists stood at stations along both walls. The live bid tracked in 6 currencies on the screen above the rostrum. She sat quietly through lots 22 through 30. She did not drink the water set on her seat arm. She watched the room. Then the screen filled with her painting, and the auctioneer said, in the measured cadence of a man who has done this thousands of times and has learned to treat every lot as the only lot, Lot 31. Simona Chaby Mott Haven, 3 a.m. January. Encaustic and oil on panel, 54 by 42 inches. Will start at 150,000. A phone specialist on the left wall raised her hand at 150. A paddle in the 3rd row answered. Another phone on the right wall. More paddles in the far section. Back to phones. 220, 250, 300. The auctioneer moved with the even tempo of someone who has done this thousands of times and has learned to read a room the way a sea captain reads water, understanding that the surface behavior is always a signal for what is moving below. Thomas Aiken stood against the side wall and was absolutely still, which in his 19 years at Sothebys was itself a signal. When Aiken stood still, it meant the room was doing exactly what he had expected it to do. The phone specialist on the left had a London bidder who had been consistent from the first increment. She was standing with her handset slightly elevated and her eyes on the rostrum, and her body angled forward the few degrees that communicates engagement without communicating urgency, because in this environment urgency is information, and information is leverage, and you do not give it away. Paddle 37 in the room was a collector Aiken had watched for 11 years, who collected exclusively in the emerging secondary category and who had never once, in Aiken's experience, walked away from a lot he had decided he wanted. He was a compact man in a navy suit and he held his paddle low when he bid, a minimal gesture, the way people move when they have done something many times and have long since stopped needing to make it visible. 450. 500. The room shifted slightly at 500, the collective body language of 80 people recalculating in real time. 550. 600. Paddle 37 paused at 600, and the room felt it the way a room feels a held breath. The phone specialist murmured into her handset. 650 from the phone. 37 came back without hesitation. 700. The phone 750. The auctioneer held the room. 8 full seconds of silence, which in auction time spans several geological ages. 750,000 on the telephone. The navy suit moved again. 800,000 in the room. The phone specialist lowered her handset, conferred briefly, set it down on the counter in front of her. 800,000 in the room. The auctioneer waited. He was in no hurry. The room was done and he knew it, and he let the room know he knew it. Any advance on 800,000? Nothing. 800,000. Fair warning. He surveyed the room with the patient authority of someone who has earned the right to this particular pause. Fair warning for the final time. The hammer came down, a single dry knock, unremarkable in itself, and the screen above the rostrum still showed $800,000 in the currency display, while the lot image already faded to lot 32. The room exhaled in the way that auction rooms exhale when a number exceeds expectations, even in a room full of people paid to manage their Expectations. Simone sat in her seat. She looked at her hands in her lap. The left thumb had been pressed into the center of her palm through the entire sale, and she unclenched it now, slowly, and looked at the half-moon mark the fingernail had left, already fading at the edges. The portfolio case was on the floor between her feet. The broken wheel was on her left side. She sat for a moment and felt the room around her going back to its business, and said nothing. Thomas Aiken came to her seat minutes later, with the composed expression of a man who has been professionally trained to manage precisely this kind of moment and who is, behind the training, trying very hard not to be anything other than professional. He said, "Congratulations. Would you like to step outside and make a call?" She called her mother. Adeze picked up on the second ring and Simone said, "It's sold," and told her the number, and the sound that came through the phone was not a word. It was the sound of a woman sitting down hard in a kitchen chair, the way your legs make the decision before your mind does. A long quiet. Simone could hear her mother's breathing. Then faintly, she heard Adeze say to someone else in the kitchen, "Come here." A pause. "Tell Grandma," Simone said. Adeze said, "She's right here." And neither of them said anything else for a while, because there was nothing that needed to be said. "Nah, man. I'm sorry. That phone call. That kitchen. That woman who pressed a foam brush into her daughter's hand and said, 'Show me what you see.' The whole story is in that one phone call. Let's finish this out." Marcus Webb woke up at 7:15 the next morning and looked at the footage again for 4 minutes. Then he opened his social accounts and posted it with no caption. Just the video. 2 minutes and 14 seconds. The gallery floor. The ivory blazer, the portfolio case, the broken wheel. This is not fine art. This is craftwork. Community center craftwork at best. No tags. No context. He posted it and put the phone down and made coffee. By noon it had been viewed 340,000 times. By 6 p.m. it had been viewed 2.1 million times. And someone in Simone's professional network had paired the video with the Sothebys results page which the auction house published that morning as standard procedure. Lot 31, Simone Sotheby, encaustic and oil on panel, sold $100,000. The two pieces of information traveled together, the gallery floor and the hammer price, the community center craft work, and the $800,000. They moved as a pair through the same networks, and everywhere they landed together, something ignited. By the following morning, 3 things happened in sequence, each one widening the field of consequence. Thomas Aiken released a statement through Sotheby's communications office. It confirmed the sale, described Simone as one of the most technically accomplished painters working in encaustic today, cited collector interest as exceptional, and noted that her work had been held by serious private collectors for over a decade. The statement was 4 paragraphs. It did not mention Claudia Hargrove. It did not need to. Priya Sethuraman, now a senior curator at the new museum, published a 5-paragraph statement to her professional profiles. It opened, "I have known Simone Sotheby's work for 12 years. It described the technical demands of encaustic painting, with a precision that made clear it was among the most rigorous practices in all of contemporary fine art. It named 3 museum collections in which Simone's work appeared. It traced her price history with the specificity of someone who had watched it build from the ground. It closed. What happened at the Hargrove Gallery on Wednesday evening was not a curatorial judgment. It was a demonstration of what institutional bias looks like when it believes it is alone in a room. And on Friday morning, Sotheby's private sales division announced that collector demand following the autumn evening sale had been sufficient for them to approach Simone. Brittley about representing a new group of works currently in progress. The announcement included a preliminary valuation for the proposed group of 12 new panels. The number was in the millions. Man, that third wave. The third-party authorities lining up one after another, each one pulling back a curtain the gallery thought was sealed shut. She didn't have to say a single word. The evidence walked itself into the room. Keep going. Claudia Hargrove did not respond publicly on day 1, or day 2. Her strategy, which would become clear in retrospect, was to wait for the news cycle to move on. It is a strategy that sometimes works. It did not work here. What broke the waiting strategy was not media pressure. It was a phone call on Friday morning from William Park, the chairman of the Hargrove Gallery's advisory board. Park's wife had purchased 2 of Simone's pieces through the Harlem Cooperative in the Faux. preceding 2 years, and Park had mentioned Simone's name to Claudia Hargrove on 3 separate occasions during those 2 years, each time receiving the kind of polite deflection that communicates a decision that has been made. He did not publish the contents of the phone call. What he published was his resignation from the advisory board, effective immediately, with the phrase, irreconcilable differences between the gallery's stated commitment to equity and its demonstrated practice. Within 48 hours, 2 more board members followed. One of them was a former vice chair of the Metropolitan Museum of Art's Contemporary Acquisitions Committee. Her statement was 4 sentences. The last one read, "The gallery's conduct reflected neither the standards of our field nor the basic requirements of human decency." A journalist at the art newspaper had everything: the video, the Sothebys result, the curator statements, the board resignations, the full timeline. The piece ran Saturday morning and became the most read article in the publication's digital history. It contained one detail not previously public. A gallery staff member, described only as a current employee, had informed the reporter that Claudia Hargrove had, in the 18 months preceding the incident, declined to schedule portfolio reviews or studio visits for no fewer than 11 Black artists who had submitted through the gallery's formal portal, while during the same period granting visits to 9 emerging artists, all white, based on personal referral alone. There was no written policy describing how submission inquiries were prioritized. There was no documentation of denial communications to the declined artists. The submissions had arrived and been filed and gone unanswered. The Hargrove Gallery announced the following Monday it was closing temporarily for a period of operational review. Claudia Hargrove's personal statement arrived 48 hours later, 4 paragraphs that had clearly passed through a communications firm. The first 3 addressed her 32-year record, the gallery's legacy, and the necessarily subjective nature of curatorial decisions. The 4th paragraph, the only one that mentioned Simone Achebe by name, stated that Claudia acknowledged her remarks were improperly delivered and regretted any distress they may have caused. It described Simone as clearly determined. That was the word, determined. After $800,000 and a Sothebys private sales arrangement and 12 years of museum quality work and curator endorsements, the word Claudia Hargrove's communications firm had landed on was determined. The comment section found that word within the hour and held on to it. The gallery's social accounts went dark for 11 days. When they returned, they announced that Claudia Hargrove had stepped down as director and that the gallery would undergo a leadership and mission transition under interim guidance. No successor was named. The sculptor whose last show had sold out in 48 hours and the photographer whose work had been acquired by MoMA both ended their representation agreements within the next 2 weeks. The sculptor's public statement was one sentence: "I need to be somewhere that sees all of us." A collector who had purchased work through the gallery for 9 years and whose buying had been responsible for roughly 12% of the gallery's annual sales volume, sent a quiet note to the new interim administrator, informing him that he would not be attending the gallery's next scheduled event and would be reviewing the relationship going forward. He did not make the note public. He did not need to. 3 other collectors followed the same approach within the month. The gallery's forward booking for its spring program collapsed before a new director had been identified. 2 artists who had been in conversation with the gallery about spring shows withdrew from those conversations. One of them had been represented by the Hargrove Gallery for 6 years and departed with a statement that said only that she was pursuing a different direction. That phrase, in the language of the gallery world, carried a specific weight. An industry trade publication reported 6 weeks later that the incident had prompted formal equity review processes at 3 other major Manhattan galleries. One published a public audit of its submission review practices. Another created an anonymous submission track to remove referral bias from initial evaluation. A third hired an outside firm to review its exhibition history by race of represented artists over the preceding 15 years. The consultant's preliminary findings were not made public. The gallery director said only that the findings were difficult and necessary. He did not elaborate on which finding was the most difficult. What was built on the other side of all of this is where the story finds its real footing. The net proceeds from the Sothebys sale, after commission, were $643,000. Simone spent 2 weeks after the sale doing what she always did when a major question resolved. She worked in the Mott Haven studio at 8 every morning for 14 consecutive days. A new series of 12 panels, each one 4 feet by 5 feet, larger than anything she had built before, each requiring a different structural approach to the wax layering at that scale. The canvas jacket, the cold, the radio on low, her grandmother's ribbon on the wall. On the 15th day, she made a different kind of call. She called Mr. Ferreira at the school on Willis Avenue. He picked up on the third ring in the way of teachers who are always simultaneously available and engaged in 17 other things. She told him she was establishing a fund, the Adeze Achebe Visual Arts Fellowship, named for her mother, full tuition, materials, and a summer studio residency at the Cooper Union for 5 high school students from the South Bronx each year. Selected by a jury of working artists, the selection based entirely on work, not grades, not attendance records, not any credential except what could be seen on a page or a canvas or a panel. She said she wanted him on the selection committee. He said yes before she finished the sentence. Then there was a pause. Then he said he needed to call her back. She said she understood. She was told later by the school's administrative office that Mr. Ferreira had sat in his classroom with the lights off for several minutes, and that some of his students had knocked softly on the door glass and asked if he was okay, and he had said very quietly that he was very okay. The inaugural cohort of 5 fellows was announced the following spring at the Cooper Union Great Hall. Judge Constance Whitmore attended. Priya Sethuraman attended. Thomas Aiken attended. Mr. Ferreira wore the green cardigan. And Adeze Achebe sat in the front row in a pressed dress she had bought for herself, which she had not done in 11 years, with her hair out and her hands folded in her lap. And when Simone walked to the podium and began to speak, Adeze pressed both hands flat against her chest and looked at her daughter with the pathos of a woman who has been waiting her entire life for this particular thing to happen and is now watching it happen and is not going to look away for a single second of it. Simone's grandmother, who was 81 years old and had taken the subway to Lower Manhattan from the Bronx because she said she did not take taxis, sat in the chair directly beside Adeze. She had polished her shoes the night before. She was wearing her good coat. She sat upright with her hands in her lap and her chin lifted, and she looked at the stage where her granddaughter was standing without a single movement in her face. The stillness of someone who has been waiting for this room for a very long time and has now arrived in it and is not going to waste 1 degree of composure. One of the 5 fellows was a 14-year-old girl from Willis Avenue, 4 blocks from the building where Simone grew up. She worked in charcoal. She had won the citywide Visual Arts Prize 2 years running. Her portfolio submission included a drawing of the crack in the kitchen wall of her apartment, rendered with precise attention to the diagonal angle and the shadow it threw at a specific hour of the afternoon, and the way it looked, at that hour, almost like something that belonged there. Nobody told her to draw it. She had simply looked at it and decided it was worth looking at. At the reception after the ceremony, Simone was introduced to her. The girl was quiet and watchful, and had ink on the side of her left hand. Simone pulled out the composition notebook she had been keeping in her bag since she was a teenager, the 47th one, the one she had never stopped adding to. She handed it to the girl, and told her to look through it. The girl held it carefully with both hands and turned the pages and was quiet for a long time. The 6 train drawings, the 3-legged dog, the crack in the kitchen wall, the man on Willis Avenue. She turned every page. Then she said, "You drew everything." Simone said, "Show me what you see." The girl looked up at her. Then she smiled, and it was the very specific kind of smile that happens when someone hands you exactly the right sentence at exactly the right moment in your life. The Hargrove Gallery reopened 4 months later under new directorship. A young curator named Diane Osei, who had previously run a gallery program at a cultural center in Washington, D.C., took the position. Her inaugural show was a group exhibition titled Revision. Critics described it as earnest and not fully arrived but moving in the right direction. Near the entrance, where the coat check desk used to be, a new panel had been installed on the gallery's signature white wall. A single line from Osei's written mission statement was printed on it in clean black type. It read, "Art does not belong to the room that decides to show it. It belongs to everyone who can see what it is. Marcus Webb started at the Sothebys Junior Specialist Program that October. In his first week, he was asked to assess a consignment inquiry for a group of encaustic works by a young painter from Detroit, whose formal approach bore resemblance to Simone's. Marcus reviewed the submission materials for 3 hours and wrote a 7-page assessment recommending acceptance. The senior specialist read it and said, "You have an eye." Marcus said he was working on it. Judge Constance Whitmore still had 4 of Simone's paintings on the walls of her home office in Riverdale. She was asked by a journalist, some months after the sale, whether she had anticipated the work would reach that level of market recognition. She said she had anticipated it for 8 years. She said the only thing that surprised her was how long it had taken the market to catch up to what any careful eye could already see. Mott Haven, 3 a.m. January, now hangs in a private collection outside of London. The collector who bought it at Sothebys for $800,000 has been approached twice about resale at significant profit. He declined both times. A journalist profiling him asked what it was about the piece that made him hold on to it. He thought for a moment. He said it was something about the light in it. He said it felt like something being simultaneously remembered and happening right now. That was the phrase Simone had used in an interview years before he purchased the painting. He had never read that interview. The work always knew what it was. "Yo, I need to stay in this for a moment before we close out. This story, and I want to be honest with you, this is a fictional story. These names, this gallery, this sale, these characters, we built them. But put your hand on your chest right now and tell me that what you just felt was fictional. Tell me the gallery floor wasn't real. Tell me the man with the champagne looking at his shoes wasn't real. Tell me you haven't been in some version of that room, maybe not a gallery, maybe an office, maybe a school, maybe a church, maybe a family dinner, where someone looked at what you brought and decided before they saw it what it was worth. And I want to ask you directly, have you ever been the person with the portfolio case? Have you ever carried your absolute best work into a room where you weren't wanted and kept your face still, and said, "Thank you for your time," and walked out with your spine straight and your thumb pressed into your palm? Because that was the only thing left to hold? Drop it in the comments. I am in there. I read every single one, and I want to know what you did with that moment. If this story reached something in you today, if Simone reached you, if Adeze reached you, if that grandmother with the kerosene heater and the pressed dress in the front row of that great hall reached you, hit the like button right now. One tap. That's all it takes to tell the platform this kind of storytelling deserves more people. Share this with one person in your life who needs to hear it today. You already know who that person is. And if you are not subscribed, do it right now. Because we drop one of these every single week, and every single one is built exactly the way this one was built, to find what's true in you and bring it all the way to the surface. I'll see you in the next one.